What's up, it's Endymion, and if you're a fan of Soulsborne games, you're likely currently playing Shadow of the Erdtree for Elden Ring, and I hope you're having a blast. From Software is, in my opinion, the greatest modern game developer studio right now. Nobody comes remotely close to what they are capable of doing these days. But of course, because this is 2024, and we're living in some weird, bizarre reality where Harambe got shot, which likely caused a string of events that have led to the insanity that we're at today, Elden Ring is now being used to push propaganda. And beyond this story, the composer of Halo blasts DEI practices, and a Legacy Games journalist goes crazy saying that gamers are the problem and not the studios. Let's start with Elden Ring first. So the reviews have come out. Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree is officially the highest rated DLC expansion of all time, which is great. I personally haven't played much of it yet since I'm obviously making this right now, but afterwards I hope to squeeze in a few hours later today. I got the whole thing downloaded and everything to go, and every review is glowing, calling it FromSoft at their best. But then there's Kotaku, who decided out of all the people to give a review code to, it was Alyssa Mercanti, of course. In case you don't know, Alyssa is one of the supervillains of Gamergate 2. She absolutely hates gamers. So much so, she has attempted to write hit pieces on YouTubers like Melanie Mac, which never came to fruition because she couldn't find any dirt on Melanie, and has said that anyone opposing the woke game industry is alt-right and a Yahtzee. She also tried to say that we're all weak and she would fight any one of us, to which female YouTubers rose up to her challenge and Alyssa backed down, protected her account, and then cried foul. This is someone who is the face of the game's journalist side, a man-hating, hairline-receding, woke activist. And of course, when it comes to Elden Ring, you can't just review the DLC like normal if you're Alyssa Mercanti. Here's what she said in her review of Shadow of the Erdtree, and I quote, "Hours into playing Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, the massive singular expansion for From Software's award-winning 2022 action RPG, I realize it's paralleling my real life. Until Elden Ring, I avoided Souls-likes. Their punishing difficulty and rigid boundaries frustrated me immensely. I hit a wall in Dark Souls Remastered and gave up, barely touched Bloodborne, and avoided Sekiro like it was a poison swamp. In the real world, I have mostly avoided the ire of homophobes and misogynists in the games industry, writing an article that temporarily shakes them up before fading into relative obscurity once Reddit refreshes. But now I am willingly subjecting myself to arduous adventure, running headfirst into a proverbial wall just to shake it off, back up, and run into it again. Outside of the Lands Between and the Shadow Realm, I have spent nearly 4 months as the subject of a near-endless harassment campaign. It feels at times like logging on for a day of work is akin to walking through a boss door over and over again. Before I even make that connection between my real world and FromSoft's game world, I subconsciously attack Shadow of the Erdtree with dogged determination, as if besting a boss would bleed into my everyday and imbue me with a higher tier of self-confidence. Much like how it feels to receive near-endless hate comments from anonymous accounts or angry middle-aged men, I face Shadow of the Erdtree entirely alone. No multiplayer summons would work for me in early access, a feature I relied on in the base game. So I faced it solo, and after 20 hours came out, as Renala says, born anew, end quote. As you can see, Alyssa couldn't help but inject her politics even into a review of Elden Ring. What irks me is that people like this, who are clearly deranged mentally, and even admit that they are not fans of Souls-likes. I mean, she says straight up she gave up on every game From Software has ever made till now, is somehow not only given a review code for early access, but is tasked out of everyone at Kotaku to review this game. Yet there's YouTubers like Ziostorm, who is a great well of information when it comes to Elden Ring and From Software's games, but he was refused a code. That actually really bothered me when I heard that, because it proves companies have their priorities in the wrong place. Ziostorm, at least, would have kept politics out of his review if he got early access and would have just told you what is going on with the DLC down to the bosses, weapons, and so on. But no, instead, Alyssa Mercanti of Kotaku gets a code and spends her opening paragraphs complaining about Gamergate 2. This Elden Ring Shadow review actually reminded me of another Kotaku review for the PlayStation 5 back in 2020, when Kotaku journalist Ian Walker spends paragraphs randomly in the middle of the review on the PS5 to talk about how he can't be excited about reviewing Sony's newest console because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And he's worried about the election and how right-wing people are advocating for Trump and how Joe Biden is his savior. At what point do we realize that Kotaku is just never going to change when it comes to these things? Journalists far too often are using video games as well as reviews of those games or consoles as soapboxes to air their dirty laundry and agendas. Elden Ring is not a political game. It does not have forced diversity or any other of those kinds of agendas. It's a dark fantasy action role-playing game where you fight fallen gods while epic music plays, and people leave really sus help messages that make you cackle at 3 AM when you tell yourself, just one more try and then I'll go to bed. Elden Ring is, for all intents and purposes, the anti-modern video game, a colossal achievement of game design that features one of the best and most daring open worlds ever seen in gaming. I personally don't think Elden Ring is my favorite From Software game myself. I think in repeated playthroughs the open world is a detriment to the experience for me, and I much prefer the smaller, more labyrinthian-esque game design of stuff like Dark Souls or Bloodborne myself. That doesn't mean that Elden Ring is bad, however. It still craps all over pretty much everything made in the West for sure. And when it won Game of the Year everywhere, it was like, well, yeah, duh, nothing else could even hope to stand close to it, not even God of War Ragnarok. And I think what makes From Software's games so great is that they feel old school if dated at times in the best way possible. When I say dated, I don't mean the gameplay is bad or anything like that, but that From Software's games, they feel like, from their game design and writing, as if they were written in the early 2000s or even in the 90s, the lack of hand-holding, the lore that is oozing out of every crevice that you need to seek out to learn, instead of having it being fed to you like a baby. The beauty of these games is so influential. I would argue outside of maybe Fortnite, I would wager that Dark Souls in 2011 is the most influential modern game we have. So many other games have copied elements from it, entire subgenres have been born out of the carcass of these masterpieces. And it's all been great to see and enjoy as other devs do their own twists on the subgenre. Even Jedi Survivor is technically a Souls-like with respawning enemies, shrine, checkpoints, and everything else. Do I think Shadow of the Erdtree is going to blow people away? Probably yeah. The DLC here allegedly could be its own new game, which is cool to see, but I think ultimately why people love these sorts of games and why Western game developers are jealous of them is because games like Elden Ring or Dark Souls, they feel like the antithesis of what modern games have become these days. There's no battle pass, seasons, monthly subscriptions, or stupid in-game crossover events. It's basically, what if Game of Thrones, Berserk, and Dark Souls had a baby? And it's brilliant. Although personally, even though I don't like some things about the game, like the Spirit Summon Ashes that trivialize content and is too readily available, and I think the last quarter of the main game's difficulty spikes out of nowhere for no other reason than they can. And this is coming from someone who has platinumed every single From Software Soulsborne game and completed them fully. I think Elden Ring's difficulty is a little too unbalanced for me sometimes, but I'm sure others would disagree, which is totally fine. But having Alyssa Mercanti of Kotaku here use Elden Ring and the achievements of From Software, who is the least controversial developer of all time, like, they don't start anything, they don't push DEI, nothing, they just make cool games and that's it. And it's wild to see the dichotomy between the based, no-nonsense Japanese developer and the woke Western reviewer clash like this. It's like oil and water, and Kotaku, as per usual, is a pathetic excuse for a website that has already lived far past its expiration date. The fact they're still using high-profile reviews of content to push their own political agenda is crazy. It's history repeating itself, and they clearly have no interest in learning from it. And Alyssa saying that she has been the subject of harassment is hilarious too, considering she originally had nothing to do with Gamergate 2. It was Sweet Baby and Chris Kindred. Alyssa decided on her own free will to throw her hat in the ring and get involved when she could have so easily stayed out and not have bothered in the first place. But she did because she felt as if it was her duty to protect wokeness, because whether they want to admit it or not, wokeness is ultimately a new form of religion. And when their deity is challenged or slandered, these corporate parasites lurch out of the darkness like the undead and then they cry racism. Elden Ring is too good for a place like Kotaku to even speak on the game at all. They are a website that has been forced by their owners to write game guides instead of virtue signaling. And Alyssa, who by the way is now editor-in-chief at Kotaku, after the previous editor-in-chief quit on the spot when leadership told them to stop virtue signaling, is now doing exactly what her previous position holder was doing anyways. Kotaku's staff is so deep in the sauce, they don't know their own ass from their faces anymore. They want to just pander and scream autistically as much as they possibly can, and the fact that they are recoiling and crying like actual children at the forced demands by their owners to make game guides, which means actually playing video games and writing about them, has caused this already empire that's built on crumbling sand to cry out because they have to finally do their jobs for once. I know I say you should reject and hate these journalists, but frankly, I don't think people dislike them enough. I don't wish physical harm or anything on them, but good lord man, at what point do you realize your side is sinking and losing and you just admit defeat and move on already? Speaking of sinking ships and not admitting defeat, we have TheGuardian.com, where Keza McDonald, who used to work for IGN, as if that surprises anyone, ended up writing an article recently denouncing the players, which is titled, "The disturbing online misogyny of Gamergate has returned if it ever went away. While some of their language has changed, the sentiment of this latest aggressive movement is just as distressing. It's time for the games industry to stand up to it." Keza decides to bring up a load of examples in her article here from the Sweet Baby stuff, Assassin's Creed Shadows, and how players are against the historically inaccurate Yasuke being portrayed as a legendary samurai, which Keza of course believes is nonsense because she doesn't have an original thought in her head. And even decides to say that the people pushing against IGN when it comes to Black Myth Wukong are morons and IGN was right all along. She even says that Elon Musk saying DEI kills art is somehow wrong even though he's absolutely right, and we've been proven right at every single turn this entire year. Your Suicide Squad game died and lost millions. How many studios have closed this year alone that have connections to Sweet Baby? Like 2, I think? Even Kotaku has been facing layoffs as their own writers get thrown to the curb because their sites aren't doing well enough. At what point do you stop yourself to look at the flames around you, inhale the smoke, and say, you know, maybe this fire is real after all. You can try to gaslight us all you want, Keza McDonald, but we know you're lying. Especially when you bring up Black Myth Wukong of all things, where Rebecca Valentine of IGN has been on a literal years-long crusade, trying to slander developer Game Science for their Monkey King action game. Keza also admits in the article she also used to work for Kotaku during the original Gamergate, which doesn't surprise me in the slightest, and champions the fact that all of her work is done from the perspective of a feminist, which also doesn't surprise me in the slightest. Keza is the model games journalist of today. Reject anything players actually want while bending over backwards and gorging on as much soy milk-filled DEI garbage as they can. They'll look you dead in the eye and tell you that Suicide Squad was a good game and Spider-Man 2's story was also great, when the actual paying customers out here will tell you how it really is, which is that DEI is killing games, TV shows too. Just go type in Star Wars Acolyte into YouTube's search bar to see the nuclear amount of reactions that there are to that garbage show. Keza also states in her article that she and her colleagues were harassed by individuals during the original Gamergate, which I don't doubt. But I also can't speak for that because I wasn't even on YouTube at the time making content or anything during that. My ascension to where I am now is largely due to how I was seeing everywhere I look how corrupted and weird the entire games industry was becoming. I would hear diversity in every sentence, start noticing patterns, and seeing the quality of many Western games diminishing. Then during the pandemic, I was in my second lockdown here in Canada when I decided I would take the leap and start YouTube because I was, once again, laid off due to the forced mandates set by the government. And the rest, as they say, is history, and here I am today, and the same can be said about entertainment media too. The existence of what I call the counterculture movement, which encompasses me and many other YouTubers and streamers, was not created because we wanted to. It happened because of the decisions made by corporations to turn their back on the fans who reign in the millions. Think about how YouTube was prior to Star Wars The Last Jedi, then I want you to think of YouTube after the release of that film, and how that single movie pretty much changed online discourse forever. Now ask yourself, why did that happen exactly? It was because in that moment, the fans who thought they could enjoy agenda-free entertainment were suddenly blindsided by the worst thing they've ever seen. At that point anyway, of course the Acolyte was but a blip in Leslie Headland's eye at this point. The point I'm trying to make here to Keza, Alyssa, and others is that the existence of channels like mine, or websites like Kerbrutus Rambles DEI Detected, or even his Sweet Baby Detected Steam plugin, these don't just exist out of nowhere. This is cause and effect to why these things happen. If the games, movies, and such industries stayed the course and just kept giving us good content that was free of agenda, none of this would exist. In a way, I look at it like a war, which sets us up rather nicely. The existence of a resistance force would not exist unless there was some sort of empire or threat to the ordinary people. That's essentially what we are in this sense. We are the resistance. We are slandered by big tech companies and journalists backed by multi-million-dollar websites like Keza here at The Guardian. And we rally together in our common cause that we don't subscribe to your madness, to your ideology, and work every day tirelessly to open as many minds as we possibly can to the poison that your side spews. And don't try, Keza or Alyssa, to say you are somehow the resistance in this regard. You are not the resistance of anything when you have every major corporation, website, and sponsor standing behind you. Whether Keza, Alyssa, and more want to admit it or not, they are the stormtroopers of the Empire. And they've become so brainwashed by the institutions around them, they genuinely believe that they are somehow morally right. Gaming journalism used to be a golden beacon of unbiased information back in the day when these journalists used to be respected and championed. But that was like 14 years ago at this point. Now they're mostly failed political writers and journalists who clinged onto video games as their saving grace before they hit rock bottom. And their downfall is not due to me or any other, it is simply because these journalists couldn't keep their opinions strictly professional. And they allowed their emotions to run amok, and now they are reaping what they sowed. They did this to themselves. The players nor our side is at fault here. We only exist because of your hubris, and if the gaming industry is like a human body, the immune system sends what it needs to eliminate the sickness. And these journos, this DEI and woke crap, is the cancer that we need to purge to save what is the gaming industry and entertainment abroad. Even the composer of Halo agrees with this. Halo series composer Marty O'Donnell says video game industry now pandering because they fear being on the wrong side of some special interest groups who can be very loud and very annoying. If you don't know who Marty is, he wrote the main themes for the Halo games and Destiny, but that's severely undermining his work. The dude has been making iconic music for decades, but pretty much without Marty's contribution, stuff like Halo and Destiny, it would be a fraction of its popularity today. Marty was recently on another YouTuber's channel whose name is Andrew Chapados, who has a podcast called Andrew Says. Marty if you don't know, is actually running to represent Nevada in the US House of Representatives, which means Marty is a conservative. Uh-oh. This means Marty is obviously the devil now because he has his own opinions and beliefs. Which means he's pretty much dead to the gaming industry now because that's how this all works these days. Andrew asked Marty, when you were involved in games, was representation on anybody's mind? Was the amount of diversity, the amount of transgender characters in games ever a topic that anybody thought they should worry about? Here's what Marty had to say. I can't show you the clip unfortunately, because it does have what seems to be licensed music in the clip, so I'll read what he said and I quote. "You know it wasn't, and go woke, go broke, we kept seeing that happen over and over again. DEI is not diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is a code word for essentially a Marxist worldview of power structures. There's so many catchwords that are being injected into the conversation, colonization, decolonization, all these kinds of things. It is so far from what, especially in the entertainment business, what people should be worried about. Are you going to tell a good story? Are you going to make a good game? Are you going to do something that's compelling emotionally for people? That's fun for people. That's what creators should be concerned about. We've had our share of, I guess I would have to say, diverse characters, but it wasn't because we needed to make sure there was a certain percentage of fill in the blank. It was because these were like either great actors or this was going to be a great character. It was never any part of what our discussions were about, like let's make sure we fill in the blanks so the game characters reflect perfectly the makeup of the society. That is just such a creatively dampening way of approaching things, which is why I think the fans are rejecting this ideology. The fans don't necessarily reject movies or games because diversity or equity or inclusion kind of things are forced into face. Certainly they don't like being preached to, but basically these are not good products. At the end of the day, it's not fun to play, it is not interesting, these characters don't sound real. That's what ends up happening, people just don't like it, they're not good stories, they're not memorable. I can't say for certain what's in everybody's mind, but I know when I was there, when I was on the board of directors at Bungie, when I talked to the higher-ups at Microsoft, there is a lot of fear, and the fear started creeping in. There is fear that you are going to essentially get on the wrong side of some special interest groups who can be very loud and very annoying, so let's placate those people. So I would say that fear is probably one of the biggest things. I don't think in my experience that these are deeply held beliefs. You have to understand that, especially in the big companies, the C-suite and the executives, all they are doing is looking at the bottom line. I honestly think a lot of these people are empty suits. They don't actually have core values, so they adopt the core values of the moment to make sure they are on the right side so they don't get any sort of backlash. And that's an indictment against the kinds of people who end up running companies, but I've rarely found people with strong moral character running the companies. They tend to just go the way the wind blows. It is going to take them a little while to realize that this is actually not helping their bottom line. There might be a few true believers out there, but it's a few and far between in my opinion." End quote. Marty worked for Bungie for years, so he has seen this sort of thing up close, and personally, what he's saying seems to echo what others against DEI and such believe as well. That none of this is random, it's by design, and it's being pushed by people who don't have values or any core principles. I guarantee you, if being a conservative was considered the right side of history, Keza McDonald and Alyssa Mercanti would wash the hair dye out of their hair, put on dresses, and start waving the American flag instantly. None of these people believe what they're saying. They are only what they are because that's what they've been told is what's acceptable. If tomorrow the DEI overlord said we need to put only white male characters into games, you would see it happen too. These people don't care, my friends, and it's like Marty said, the people who make these decisions, ultimately, they don't create anything anyways. It's like the Hollywood suits with all the money. You think they care who or what Captain America, Spider-Man, or Master Chief is? They just know that those characters mean that they'll make money if they use them, so they do. They couldn't tell you their origin stories or what villains they faced or anything because they don't care. And it's the same with DEI. They don't play the games that come out because they don't really care either. Just go and do it because our boss says so and then give us money. They could care less if the product sucks because they don't see you as people anyways. In the end, these DEI companies and their yes men at places like IGN who attack Black Myth Wukong, The Guardian who thinks gamers are wrong, or Kotaku who uses their Elden Ring review to complain about Gamergate 2, none of it is being done with your enjoyment or respect in mind. You just don't matter to these people. People like Rebecca Valentine of IGN will continue to slander Black Myth Wukong until she gets an answer. I honestly wouldn't even be surprised if Rebecca Valentine ends up being the reviewer for Wukong at IGN. And if she does, you can bet your sweet butt cheeks she'll sprinkle that review with how game science is allegedly sexist. Because the art of the games, the music, the voice acting, the content, none of this matters to any of these people. All that matters is checking boxes, pushing agendas, and ensuring that their beliefs are championed. And if there was ever a game that perfectly encapsulates the era that we're living in right now, it's Elden Ring. The industry is the Erdtree, and fellas, it is burning down to cinders, but let's hope once the fires cease that what grows in its place is a more honest and healthy games industry. Thank you for watching, subscribe, share, like the video, thanks to my patrons as well, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.